15 Psych Ward Stories That Will Ruin Your Day, Part 2. If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video. 9. Mood whiplash. One worker attempted to keep things light. I worked with a 50-years-old white female. She had Downs and early onset Alzheimer's, and looks very typical Down syndrome. It's obvious by looking at her that she is low cog. By far one of the most challenging direct care clients I've had, which is saying a lot. She was an escape artist and loved to steal soda and mail. Anyway, she escaped one late afternoon from the house, despite all doors and windows being alarmed, and went to the liquor store about 3 blocks away. Chugged the 6-pack of PBR in front of the 2 store clerks, and then grabbed another 6-pack and run back home. I was out looking for her. Liquor store was my second stop after McDonald's, and when she came back into the house she ran upstairs into the bathroom and barricaded herself in, and the other staff heard her chugging the rest of the beer. She is less than 5 feet, and consumed 12 beers within 30 or 40 minutes. Obviously in a group home she normally doesn't drink. She danced around and giggled for a while, and then passed out. The kicker. She later yelled at me belligerently for making her feel dizzy, and like she was dying. One of my less heavy stories. However, when people went out of their way to ask this person for a heavy story, the worker finally obliged. One woman with Mr. enjoyed being restrained by the large black support staff. This is a residential program for adults, so we were trying to decrease her of restraint. Partially BC it creeped the guy out. She would moan in pleasure and try and grind on him when being restrained, and when her normal shtick didn't work she punched through a wall, pulled out the fiberglass insulation and started rubbing in her eye. She got what she wanted, she got restrained, but now has a glass eye. Both of these stories were in the same thread. I don't know about you, but I think this is some pretty dramatic mood whiplash. First, we're hearing a story about an elderly female escape artist, and then we're hearing about a patient that wanted to be restrained so badly, she lost an 10. Attempt to stop hallucinating. This story is short and to the point, but I guarantee you that it will stay with you. This former worker told a story of one man dealing with such awful hallucinations that he was willing to do anything to stop them. There are plenty of stories of people being ejaculated on. That just happens all the time. But one time they had a guy who was hallucinating, and they gave him meds to try to knock him out, so he would just sleep. However, that was not working. After they served dinner they went to collect the garbage, and noticed the spoon missing. A plastic spoon, mind you. This man literally removed his eyeballs with the plastic dinner spoon in an attempt to stop hallucinating. 11. By far the worst job of my life. This former psych ward intern was very clear that this was the worst job that they'd ever had, not only because of the conditions in the job description, but because it was so hard to know what the patients had been through, and sometimes work with their abusers. When asked what the craziest story they had actually was, they had this to say: one kid had been subjected to such horrific abuse that he could barely communicate. I'm talking literal torture, being chained up like a dog for months, as well as repeatedly raped. Apparently his mom had done the worst of it, and was still in prison, but his dad had been involved too. Here's the weird part. The dad came in on a weekly basis. He would have come in every day, if it had been allowed, and visited his son, read to him, worked on projects for school, etc. I was all set to hate the guy, but it was obvious after a while that he was sincerely trying to help. I never knew what caused him to do the things he did, but I had to respect him for making the effort to repent. 12. Most terrifying week of my life. Some of these stories are basically impossible for me to expand upon, or for anyone to expand upon for that matter, so I will present this next story about the worst roommate story I'd ever heard without comment. I was in a psych ward for 10 days for attempting suicide. I had the most terrifying experience of my life there. I was only 17 at the time, and in a pretty bad mental state, which made the following even more disturbing for me. On the first day that I got there, I was assigned a roommate named John. He seemed pretty nice at first, and showed me around the hospital, and helped me out while I was new. Something didn't seem right about him though. He would stare into the distance for long periods of time, mouth open, drooling, until I eventually asked if he was okay. The second night I was there, he informed me that he was a Satan worshipper and had the ability to talk to the devil. This kind of freaked me the fuck out, mainly because he claimed that the devil and other demons were whispering to him all the time. This disturbed me, and I started to keep my distance from him. He stayed in our room, which by the way, had its own private bathroom, for most of the evening while I played basketball with the other patients to relax. When I had to come in for the night and went into my room, I noticed that John wasn't in bed and the bathroom door was locked. Then it struck me that the room had been absolutely demolished. The beds were on its side, and on the back of the headboard was a huge pentagram carved into the wood. Naturally, I started to be concerned, so I knocked on the bathroom door. I heard John making really weird noises and talking to someone in there. I waited 20 minutes to see if he came out, but he didn't. The weird noises that he was making grew louder, and he kept laughing and talking to someone or something. Eventually I decided to open the bathroom door, because they did not have locks on the inside, so patients couldn't hide. When I opened the door, I saw John covered in blood, naked on the floor, eyes wide open staring at me. He had smashed the mirror in the bathroom and used the shards to carve deep gashes up his arms and legs. There was blood everywhere. I thought he was going to die, so I immediately rushed in and tried to help him up. Big mistake. When I came near, he grabbed my arm and stabbed me with a piece of the mirror. I screamed, which caused the nurses to come rushing in and restrain him. He was laughing like a madman. They brought him to the hospital for his cuts, and I got stitches. I later got a new room, and new roommate. The weirdest part? He came back 7 days later, but stayed in a different ward for psychotics. He came up to me at dinner, and had no recollection of the event. Most terrifying week of my life. 13. Darting away like scared rabbits. There's a lot of psych ward stories that are dramatic and crazy sounding, but sometimes the ones that stick with you are the quieter moments. One Reddit user talked about what it was like to watch the patients in the ward watch you. When my uncle was in a psych ward for severe depression, there would be this room that everyone would socialize in. It was kinda sad, because they were all just sleepy and come from all the medication they were on. They just stare at you and slowly look away. There was an incident where I was visiting him in his room, and I turned around to see a whole bunch of them peeking in the doorway. When they saw me looking at them, they darted away like scared rabbits, but when I had my back turned they'd creep again. The nurse said they don't see outsiders visit the ward often. Most of the time their family just dumps them there and forgets about them. 14. Quiet rooms. This was another Reddit story that actually ruined my night. I couldn't imagine being in a situation like this, and unless you've actually spent time in a psych ward, you probably couldn't either. After I attempted to kill myself earlier this year, they told me they were going to detain me for at least 3 days, and if I resisted they were going to call the police. Thing is, the hospital in the city was full, so they sent me 2 hours out to the middle of nowhere. There were about 12 of us on the floor, and it was pretty apparent that everyone else had many deeper problems than my depression. Still, most of them were nice, and I spent my time on my bed reading, while the nurses did nothing but hand me pills twice a day. On my second night there, I heard screaming in the halls. The doors had no locks, so another girl, probably about my age, early 20s, kicked my door open and stood in the doorway, staring at me with white eyes and a knife in her hand. I sat there frozen for a few seconds, before she was tackled by 2 security guards. A nurse came in and said to me, "All rushed, don't worry, we have everything under control, just stay in your room quietly." They then locked her in one of the quiet rooms, padded cell with a circular window, which was right across the hall from me, where she spent the rest of the night kicking at the door and yelling threats like, "I'll fucking rape all of you cunts and slit your throat." The next day the psychiatrist finally came to talk to me, said, "Are you going to try to kill yourself again?" I said no, I'm good, and they sent me home. All in all, my time there did much more harm than help. 15. Slow motion tiger. It took a long time to narrow down the stories I found to 15, between actual stories of people I know and the tales that circulate around the internet. However, some stories really stood out, like this one that made the rounds on Reddit. I was in one once for about 2 weeks after threatening, not attempting, suicide. There was a girl, she was early 20s, and I was curious as to why she was on the children's floor. Apparently, the girl was seriously messed up in the head and had been there since she was 10. Her parents were either rich or has great insurance, because she was there 24/7 for over 10 years. She would flip out the night of any new arrivals, like, she was screaming up and down the halls the night I arrived, and then was fine until a few days later, when a new girl arrived. Anyway, this girl was huge, maybe 5'10", and at least 200 pounds. The floor was getting ready for visitation, the first one, since I had been there, and all of a sudden, she came charging out of her room, down the hall to the common room and started flipping tables, tore the TV off the wall, punched 2 orderlies, and broke a few other things until one of the nurses, sweet tiny older woman, chased her down and got her in the ass with a triple dose of Thorazine. She tried to fight it, and it was like a slow-motion tiger. Eventually they called up 3 burly security guards who basically dragged her to the quiet room. About an hour later, we watched them drag her back to her room and strap her down to the bed. She slept for almost 2 days. Edit. Thought I should clarify, this was not a long-term facility. The longest I heard of anyone staying aside from her was 60 days.